Hi everyone! We get so obsessed with building the perfect digital experience that we sometimes forget that for many companies the real magic happens offline. I've been keen to speak to a company that successfully bridges the gap between offline and online, and I think I finally found the perfect product person. Faris Aziz is the lead product manager at Bloom & Wild. Even if you haven't ordered flowers from them, you probably remember that they pioneered the letterbox flower delivery back in 2013. 8 years later, and a few months after their Series D funding round, here is what Faris shared about the way they approach growth at Bloom & Wild.
Welcome to The Product Show. Insightful interviews with founders and tech leaders sharing how they hack product growth.
Hi Faris, welcome to The Product Show.
Hi Desi, so good to speak to you.
It's a pleasure to finally speak with you. I've been keen to speak to someone like you who comes from a company who is looking after not only the digital experience but also the offline experience. So I'm really excited about our conversation. Tell me a little bit more about your background and how did you become lead product manager at Bloom & Wild?
Yeah, awesome. So I started years ago as a consultant and wanted to move away from kind of advising companies and actually being in-house and having a proper impact. So I moved from there to Trainline, where I was first introduced to product. Before Trainline, I didn't even know product management was a thing. There's some amazing product managers at Trainline and learned a lot from some of those guys there. Moved from there to Trussell, an online mortgage broker, a very small startup at the time, and like learned a huge amount about product management, real tangible day-to-day, kind of getting more responsibility than you should do in a small startup. And from there moved to Depop, really fast-paced, really exciting business that was growing rapidly. I think this t-shirt is actually from them. And from Depop moved to Bloom & Wild, which is again, like as much loved as Depop, I think, by the community and by the users and by the customers. And I think that's what's so cool about Bloom & Wild and also Depop is just how much customer love there is. And Bloom & Wild, yeah, like you said, kind of bridging the gap between offline and online, a physical product, whereas Depop's a platform, Trussell was also a platform, Trainline, again, like more of a platform, whereas Bloom & Wild has a physical product, which brings its own challenges.
Right, and can you tell us a little bit more about your day-to-day and what exactly are you in charge of at Bloom & Wild as a lead product manager?
Yeah, so when I first joined, I was the product manager for the growth team. We kind of rebranded ourselves as we've grown. Our scope within the product team has kind of been broken up a little bit more. So I'm now overseeing acquisition and discovery, which is broadly the same kind of product area from awareness all the way through to that first purchase. So I'll work very closely with the marketing teams across paid acquisition as well as SEO, work super closely with the tech team to think about performance and site speed, and then the core browse and explore experience as well. More recently, we've hired a PM for the apps, and I'll be supporting and managing them as well.
Exciting. Right. So in the digital product and design community, we are kind of obsessed with building those effective, sticky products. But for Bloom & Wild, as you mentioned, and also for many other companies, of course, the digital experience is only part of the whole picture. The real product for you is the flowers. The magic happens offline. So can you tell us a little bit more about how you've structured the teams and also your processes to make sure that you're building an effective customer feedback loop, and also to make sure that this feedback doesn't collect dust somewhere?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think in previous organizations, it's been much more tech-driven and tech-led and product driven. So Depop, obviously there's a big community, but within the product tech teams, you can kind of come up with the ideas in isolation. There's not another broader team to kind of consult. Whereas at Bloom & Wild, we've got the range team, we've got the merchandising teams, we've got the brand teams, all have a different angle and a different take on what they think is important, and also a different kind of input from users. So a huge amount of feedback we get from users every single day from all different areas. And everyone within the business, I think what's really key to success and listening to users is that everyone cares about that. It's the number one thing that we talk about. There's just a relentless number of things being shared, insights and opinion from customers and different views. So yeah, like kind of preventing stuff from gathering dust is a really, really interesting challenge because there's so much input. I think from the product team's perspective, it's all about prioritization and thinking about what the most important thing is for the user. And that's obviously a multiple factors, but yeah, that's kind of how we deal with it.
Right. And as a product manager, I can imagine that you constantly have an abundance of product improvement opportunities in front of you, many of which sound amazing on paper. And how do you assess those opportunities? How do you prioritize them and decide what to focus on? And the reason I'm saying that is because from my recent conversation, prioritization is obviously one of the biggest challenge for many product people. There is so much we could do, and we are always limited when it comes to time and resources. So do you have like, your own system or framework or a process that you follow to prioritize those opportunities?
Yeah, I think there are loads and loads of processes and frameworks, and I've used a lot throughout my career. But
And
I
which
think,
ones work for you?
yeah, well, there's the RICE methodology I always really, really like using. I think I usually use that at the beginning of a product discovery process at a high level to identify themes. But broadly speaking, when I get into the detail, it's a combination of business and user impact. And that's often assessed across different stakeholders. So there's going to be different opinions across different parts of the business about what is the most impactful for the business and what is the most impactful for users. So taking those kind of inputs, combining it with how much resource we have within the team, you can then develop a plan. And as I think what's interesting as well within product is actually after like a year or so working for a particular business, I find generally that's when you start to really feel like you understand how much effort something is going to take to build, how much impact you think this thing could have, and you start to have a bit of an instinct combined with that process. Is when I start to feel like I'm really firing all cylinders as a product manager and understanding which things are most important. And the instinct comes from, previous tests, what's gone well, what hasn't gone so well, having more context of the business at a broader level. You've got time now, you've been established, you kind of understand where the business direction is going strategically. And sometimes things are prioritized for the future as opposed to the present. Yeah.
Right, that makes total sense. So let's talk a little bit more about the challenges for you as a product, and from where I sit as an outsider, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just literally shooting in the dark. But my assumption is that the biggest challenge for you is repeat orders and retention. You have the monthly subscription option on your website, which is great. But the nature of buying flowers, especially online, is obviously around special occasions. So can you tell us a little bit more about the efforts to create demand? What do you do to bring people back, to turn them into regular customers? For example, I noticed something on your homepage where you prompt people to save 3 dates, and you're gonna credit £5 to their account. Can you share some other interesting examples that worked really well in terms of campaigns and features?
Yeah, the retention team, I've done loads of stuff to drive that behavior that you described. We identified, not myself, another PM, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but identified high value actions. A series of actions that we identified through data that indicated an increased propensity to purchase and to repeat. Things such as liking items, favoriting occasions, as you described, and then from that insight, developed a strategy to try and drive those actions. Another big one has been downloading the app. Which is now super interesting. Now I'm kind of looking after the app a little bit more, understanding what types of users are more likely to download the app. Not everyone knows Bloom Wild has an app. Sometimes surprising. It's not that common in the.
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, but we actually surprisingly have a huge number of users, a huge number of loyal, engaged users, and it drives a lot of repeat orders as well. So kind of thinking about those high value actions on the web experience, translating that into getting people to also download the app and how that experience can be replicated on the app. I think there's a huge opportunity for us in the future to really think about repeat purchases on our app.
Interesting. Can you share the findings from a recent growth experiment that you've done internally? Something like an interesting anecdote from the Bloom and White kitchen?
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting experiments I've run recently, or we've run within the team, has been, it sounds super simple. So it's really related to the information architecture and the way that we group products. And as I mentioned, there's a huge number of inputs from across the business that care about this kind of stuff. And obviously everyone cares about how we structure the products, but in particular the merchandising and range team, it's really how they communicate those individual products to our users. So the navigation is where we surface that. Primary navigation on web. Used to, before the experiment, the first item was often letterbox flowers. It's what we're known for. It's the majority of our sales. It's our core value proposition. But actually, going forwards, that's not necessarily going to be the case. We're expanding into different areas. We want to sell different types of products to different types of users. And we started to think about what that navigation might have to look like to cater for that future range and that future business. We did a very simple card sorting exercise with users to understand, here's a bunch of products, here's what we sell. Like, does our navigation support how you see the world, how you see Bloom World? So group these things up. Do users just put them in letterbox flowers? If they do, great. That probably means our navigation is like fit for purpose and is working. But what we actually found was that people found the delivery method super important. So whether the product came through the letterbox or whether it arrived at their door. So our larger products that can't fit through the letterbox that we sell, the users definitely wanted that to be kind of separate, in a separate grouping or structure. And equally, flowers versus plants or flowers versus other things was a very common grouping that the users that we talked to also did. So what we did was then simply test our old navigation versus a new navigation that more clearly focused on delivery and also product type. And we found the new navigation, which was very simply flowers and plants as the first item, through the letterbox as the second, and to the door as the third, followed by our normal occasions and monthly flowers. We found a huge impact on conversion. Conversion increased by several percentage points, as well as actually SKU mix of other products. So we found monthly flowers was impacted really positively. So you mentioned subscriptions and bundles and the other products that we sell. So having a clearer navigation tailored to our users, much more customer centric, meant that they're actually more easily able to find those other products.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. And that kind of reminds me of a way we approach our workshops here. We always start discovering the new journeys with what are the red routes, what are the most critical actions that we want the user to take. So that is a really great discovery. And how about a small UX tweak? Product improvement, and something really little that you didn't expect to have huge impact on the product, but it turned out to be a big win. Did you ever have such a magical moment for something really small that turned out to be a big win?
Yeah, so I guess this is sort of small, I think, in the way that a user would imagine.
It's never small, right? It
just
looks
it's never small.
It comes from months and years of experience.
So what was a really cool change that we made, and this was quite a while ago, was switching the way that we surface products on our product list pages. So classically on e-com, it would be a grid view, products just in grids and lists, and you'd be able to scroll down.
Right.
However, a year ago, we actually had a horizontal carousel that you'd swipe across. During very early user interviews with some customers, people were finding, and they were saying, and normally what you find in user interviews is actually they're very likely to be okay with certain friction. They're often like much more open to it because they're in an interview. They're like, yeah, I'm not too bothered with doing that thing. But actually what we found whilst interviewing them was that flicking horizontally through these products, they were actually getting like mentally tired during the interview, which for me was a big alarm bell. If they're surfacing that kind of issue in an interview, it's much more likely to even be amplified when, you've got a few minutes, you just want to quickly look at a site and quickly find something to buy. You're in a rush, you're on your phone. You're not in an interview situation where you've got loads of time. and they were saying that basically they were getting tired from looking through all these products. And by the end of the kind of swiping process, they weren't sure exactly what they saw at the beginning of the process. So from that, really simply, we thought, why don't we try thinking about a grid view? Our range has expanded since we had this horizontal kind of browsing experience, and we changed it to be vertically scrolling and a grid view. And again, like a huge impact on conversion rate. Sounds quite simple, sounds quite small. Obviously, yeah, it took a lot of kind of effort to get there and a bit of surfacing that insight. But yeah, really, really interesting change that dramatically changed the way our users actually interacted with the site.
And from your experience, what do you think is the secret to sustainable product growth?
I think, and I'm sure you've probably heard this by a lot of the people you speak to, but it's all about staying close to your customers and understanding their needs. And it's really, as I've kind of grown in my career as a product manager, you kind of realize a way of taking what a customer is saying and extrapolating that into what that actually means for opportunity or the next thing to do or the next area of opportunity to explore more deeply. So what I've found from Bloom and Wild in particular is getting really close to the user right at the beginning of the product discovery process. So you've identified an objective or a thing you want to achieve within the product team, within the teams more broadly, within your squads. Speak to a bunch of users to understand that much more deeply and richly. And then from there, you can then confidently dive into, let's like start sketching designs. This is what we think will really nail that problem that we've identified by speaking to people. So it's that speaking to users phase and getting that deep, rich user insight that mitigates risk for you going down the rabbit hole and for you to think that this particular solution is the right thing to do. I think that is really and it's quite simple, really. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's also a good reminder because sometimes we get so busy with all the different projects and the workload that we forget to speak to customers, or at least we don't speak to them as often as we should. Can you tell me, how do you balance what you just described, the user research and the customer feedback part of the process, with using your instincts as a product manager? And how do you decide it's time to innovate and bring something to the market that it's not an apparent customer need?
I think that's a really good point. And I think generally speaking, if it's something that I have like a little insight on, I think this thing could work. I tend to only go with my gut if it's small. If it's small and doesn't take a huge amount of effort, it's not going to take an engineer, several weeks to do. Whereas if it's something that's like larger, requires more effort, might require more technical changes to be made, then I will tend to lean on user research and make sure that we are doing that kind of groundwork to mitigate the resources that we use. So it's so important, obviously, as a business, to make sure that everything you do is kind of profitable, makes sense from a cost perspective. You're not wasting too much time on stuff, but with the scope of being able to experiment and explore. So I tend to try and mitigate the risk of something larger with user research and make sure that's really where we start. Whereas the smaller things, I might have an idea, or the team comes up with a really cool idea. As long as that's kind of smallish, then maybe we don't need to do a huge amount of research.
Right. And if you were starting in product management now, how would you spend the first 3 months of your career? Where would you invest your time?
That's a really good question. I think what I enjoyed, and I think I would probably advise someone starting out, would be to perhaps start off in a quite an established company that's got a solid kind of product team, and not be totally, not be the first product hire to be your first product role, or even the second, maybe. When I first started off at Trainline, there was a really strong team there, and I could ask them questions, I could make mistakes, they could tell me where I was going wrong, they could coach and guide me like daily. It's great having mentors, but having someone actually there daily, you could observe them, the way they work, having someone to learn from, I think is the most important thing for your first product role and for your first few months.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably find, I guess, the right environment to make mistakes. break
Yeah.
things and learn on the way, so you're not punished early on.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think culture, I guess, yeah, having that psychological safety is so important. And during the interview process, if you're looking for your first product role, to really interrogate the person that you're talking to about the culture of the company. Is it the kind of place that you think you could learn within? Because learning, like you will make mistakes because you're learning. That's just what's going to happen. So are they open to that? Are they okay with that? Do they have the kind of culture that fosters that? It's positive. It's massively positive. And I think organizations that I've really enjoyed working for have had that at the core. Bloom Wild is certainly one of those. So I think it's super important, probably even more important at the beginning of your career.
Right, absolutely. And before I let you go, Faris, tell me the product metrics you start your day with. What are you obsessed with at the moment?
I do quite love, and maybe it's a bit of a vanity metric, but I do really love revenue per user. So
Right.
understanding exactly how much our users are bringing to the business.
Yeah, I believe your management would love to hear that. That's the main thing we all should care for, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best place to look for me if you want to connect. Faris Aziz, just type me in. I should be there.
The Product Show is brought to you by Pony, a design studio helping startups and scale-ups build and optimize their digital products at speed. Check pony.studio to learn more.